Next, we embark on an electrifying journey into the future of human connection. Just a century ago, no one could have imagined a world dominated by the likes of Zoom, Google, MS Team calls, and yet today they're the linchpin of how we communicate and how we work with groups. So it's time to shatter the myth of digital disconnection and plunge into a world where avatars, augmented reality, and virtual reality redefine collaboration and connectivity. Please welcome Partner Innovation Technologies at CGI, Sarah Baldeo.
Thanks, everyone, for joining me today. Now, as we think about how human beings have evolved in communication methods over the past 2,000 years, a lot has certainly changed, from hieroglyphs to new communication methods, cell phones, languages learned, languages lost, emojis. Really, we're constantly changing and we're constantly evolving, even how we connect from a social perspective. But when we think about the future and the future of human connectivity, what does it mean as we look at the pace of technology and people needing to be able to navigate technology in order to communicate with each other? We're basically creating a premise that if you can't navigate technology, then you're going to have challenges communicating with other people. So as we think about the future and enabling people, I really want to take you on a journey of the neuroscience of what is going on in your brain as technology is changing, and how can this information help you as you navigate the future. Now, 1,000 years ago, letters were pretty much the only way that people could communicate across great expanses of geography. But the idea of telephones 1,000 years ago would have sounded ludicrous to anybody that you tried to explain it to. When Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, this concept of being able to communicate with somebody miles away on some sort of a device, it sounded crazy to people. And they thought, no, that's never going to work. No one's going to use telephones. And the original telephone was actually a needle connecting a wire to a battery, and that battery was connected to a receiver. And vocal vibrations would be converted by that receiver into electrical currents so somebody could hear you on the other line. If you said to somebody, when Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, yeah, we're just going to convert vocal vibrations into electrical currents, they would have thought you were insane. When computers and cell phones first were at the advent of being introduced to the market, people thought, this is ridiculous. This is never going to take off. Nobody's going to care about it. But fast forward to BlackBerry and Palm Pilot, when they were confronted with the invention of the iPhone, they said, well, no way, we're not going to remove the keyboard from the phone. Who would want a phone without a keyboard that you can click on? Through every iteration of technology that has changed the way people interact with each other, it's always been deemed as improbable or impossible until one day it simply became the norm. Human beings have always evolved to find new and more efficient ways of communicating with each other, whether it's carrier pigeons or a cell phone that weighs as much as a brick. Now, one of the most fascinating things and impactful things as you think about the future is, I said technology is growing at a rapid pace, but so is your brain. Now, the physiology of the brain is changing, and your frontal cortex, that's the front part of your brain, is what has actually changed the most in the past 2.5 million years. But what's interesting is 1,000 years ago, certain parts of your brain were growing and changing, predominantly that frontal cortex. Now, with the advent of technology, researchers have discovered that there's different parts of your brain that are growing. So when you think about what happens when you use technology, people in parts of the world where they have access to digital pieces of tech and they have access to technological assets, their neurological changes are very different than people in parts of the world where they don't have access to those tools. I'll give you an example. Think about the brain of a child. When a child is watching maybe 2 hours, or let's be real, way more than 2 hours of time on a gaming console or an iPad, the vision center of that child is going to be totally different than a child that grew up in another part of the world where they didn't have access to personal devices. This kind of change is precisely why digital accessibility is so absolutely important. Now, in the next decade to a century, what we're going to see is changes in the human brain in 3 main areas. The first area is your occipital lobe. That's actually at the back of your head, believe it or not, and it controls vision. The second area is your amygdala. That controls things like social interaction and emotional regulation. And the third area that's going to change as a result of technology is your hippocampus. And the reason for that is your hippocampus is your memory center. It's where long-term memory is stored. Researchers have also seen that attention spans in adults and children are very much reduced. So when you think about what is happening to your brain in the future as you continue to engage with technology, you can also reflect on what happens with our bodies over time. So the physiology of what happens if we continue to sit. Will our spines look different? What about our vision center from being exposed to a screen? When archaeologists look at preserved human remains, they get clues. They get clues from the skulls, from the teeth. They even know what kinds of injuries people had, and they can place at what era was this person living. Our bodies are going to have clues as well about how we lived, the nature and nuances of our environment. Now, the fear with technology, everyone is talking about generative AI, is this concept that we're just not going to interact face-to-face anymore. But those same fears, if you can believe it, existed when the telephone was invented. Anytime there is a major industrial revolution, there are fears, there are jobs that don't exist anymore, and then there are creations of new jobs. The difference in 2023 is that we have access to more media and information than we ever had before. And that information is not always validated. So this fear of the fact that we're not going to interact with each other anymore, it's one that is not new. I think when we consider how our bodies are changing, the example of being in augmented reality is a really good one. How does your body perceive that information? So when somebody is wearing an Oculus Rift or they're wearing a headset, there's a couple of different things that happen when they get out of the game. Their ocular motor perception is completely interrupted. And when you consider when you're in a room and here I'm standing in front of you, I'm connecting with you, I'm looking at you, the neural synapses in my brain are having a very different reaction than if I was connecting with you on Zoom or Teams or Google Meet. And so what researchers have discovered is that proprioception is this concept of where I am in relation to you, objects around me. And when somebody takes off their headset and they come out of a augmented reality game, they're disoriented. Think about, for the 2 years of COVID, if you didn't see anybody for that time, how did you feel when you interacted with someone face to face? Was it a bit strange? Scientists have actually discovered that the amygdala experiences a memory trigger when you see a face. And that happens whether you see the face in person or whether you see it on a screen. But what happens when you're in a conference call and nobody's on camera? The truth is, you just don't remember people in the same way as if you saw their face. Face-to-face interactions also yield neurotransmitters like oxytocin. If you don't know what oxytocin is, that's okay. It's the bonding hormone. That hormone is produced when you are having a face-to-face interaction with somebody. And when you don't have that, you just don't bond as easily with them. Now, as we think about technology, so often today there are these mysterious fears around AI, generative AI, what's going to happen in the future, what's going to happen with technology. And those fears are all relating to the fact that people are worried about human beings becoming superfluous. But when you think about digital identity, metaverses, augmented intelligence, and the future of tech, these tools have the ability to empower people to connect across geographies. They can leverage their subject matter expertise, they can leverage their resources and their skills, and truly monetize those abilities in a way that might not have been possible for them historically. Now, my parents immigrated from Jamaica, and I just happened to be born in Toronto. I've worked at great companies, some of the biggest IT consulting firms and technology firms, but I have those opportunities because I was born here and because I have access to tech. If I wasn't born here and I didn't have access to technology or didn't know how to navigate it, my life would look very differently. So as we think about technology, I want you to imagine with me a world where you could collaborate, communicate, and connect with anyone in the world, regardless of where they were born and where they live. Picture a world where technology got to the point where virtual reality and physical reality was completely indistinguishable from one another. Think about it. Could you trick the brain into believing that you were having a face-to-face interaction? Now, I'll end with this. Technology should not replace face-to-face human interaction, but what it should do is create a future to empower and enable people all over the world to be part of the next step of human evolution. Thank you.
I gotta take some time to grow, but I don't wanna let you go. How do we get so comfortable?